I was sitting in my car in the parking garage at 11 p.m. on a Thursday when I realized I'd finally won. Not the screaming, fist-pumping kind of victory. The quiet kind. The kind where you leave the office at a reasonable hour because the systems you built no longer require you to be the system. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It started 3 months earlier, in Stephanie's office. Director of Operations at Velvet Technologies, corner office, motivational posters about synergy. She'd asked me to come in at 4 p.m. on a Friday, which should have been my first warning sign. "Ria, thank you for coming." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. Her smile was the practiced kind, the one that came with management training modules. I wanted to discuss some exciting organizational changes. I sat. I'd been with Velvet for 7 years. Senior Systems Analyst, though the title had always felt inadequate for what I actually did. I didn't just analyze systems. I was the systems. Every integration, every database migration, every client-facing platform that kept this company running, I'd built it, documented it, maintained it. Alone. "We're bringing in some fresh talent," Stephanie continued. "Geoffrey Whitmore. He comes highly recommended from the consulting circuit. MBA from Wharton, worked with some impressive firms." I nodded. Fresh talent was always code for something. "We'll be redistributing some responsibilities to better leverage our resources." She slid a document across the desk. "Geoffrey will be taking over your primary client accounts and the core infrastructure projects. He's more efficient with these high-visibility deliverables." She smiled when she said it. "More efficient than you." I read through the reassignment sheet. Everything that mattered, everything I'd spent years building, was now assigned to someone named Geoffrey Whitmore. What remained for me was a scattered collection of maintenance tasks and documentation updates, busy work disguised as a role. "This takes effect Monday," Stephanie added. "I know change can be uncomfortable, but I'm confident this will strengthen the team overall." I looked up at her. She was still smiling. "I understand," I said. And I did. I understood perfectly. Geoffrey Whitmore wasn't just fresh talent. He was Stephanie's former colleague from her previous company. I'd seen his name on the organizational chart that morning, noticed his reporting structure went directly to her, bypassing the usual channels. This wasn't about efficiency. This was about relationships, about rewarding the people who fit into the right social circles. I walked out of that office with the reassignment sheet in my hand and something cold settling in my chest. Not anger, exactly. Clarity. I spent that weekend in my apartment, staring at the ceiling, thinking about load-bearing walls. In architecture, a load-bearing wall is essential to a structure's integrity. Remove it, and everything above collapses. For 7 years, I'd been a load-bearing wall at Velvet Technologies, holding up projects and systems and entire client relationships that no one else understood well enough to manage. Stephanie had just decided to remove me. Fine. Sunday night, I made a decision. A simple one, really. A new personal rule that would govern every interaction going forward. I would do exactly what was assigned to me, nothing more, nothing less. No more covering gaps. No more anticipating problems before they became crises. No more being available at midnight when something broke. I would perform my newly diminished role with absolute precision and zero initiative. I'd been the safety net for so long that everyone had forgotten what falling felt like. It was time to let them remember. Monday morning arrived bright and clear. I got to the office at 9 a.m. sharp, not 7:30 like usual. I made coffee. I sat at my desk. I opened my laptop and reviewed my new task list, update documentation for the legacy billing system, audit user permissions for the client portal, review backup logs. Simple. Contained. Not my problem if anything else broke. At 9:47 a.m., Philip from Client Services appeared at my desk, slightly out of breath. "Ria, thank God. The Carrington account integration is throwing errors. Their entire order system is down. Can you take a look?" I glanced up from my screen. That account was reassigned to Geoffrey. He's handling all primary client integrations now. Philip blinked. Right, but Geoffrey isn't familiar with the Carrington setup yet. It'll take him hours just to figure out the architecture. You could fix this in minutes. I'm sure he'll manage, I said. He's very efficient. Philip stared at me for a moment, trying to parse whether I was serious. I returned to my documentation. He left. At 10:23 a.m., Danielle from Product pinged me on Slack, API endpoint down for Fletcher Industries. Need immediate fix. I responded, Geoffrey Whitmore is now handling infrastructure. Please contact him. At 11:15 a.m., my phone rang. Internal extension. I let it go to voicemail. By noon, I could feel the shift in the office atmosphere. People were walking faster. Voices were slightly louder. There was a tension in the air, like the pressure change before a storm. I ate my lunch at my desk and continued auditing user permissions. At 2:34 p.m., Geoffrey himself appeared. Mid-30s, expensive suit, confidence that came from rooms where everyone agreed with you. Ria, hey. He leaned against my cubicle wall. Having some trouble accessing the production database credentials. They're not in the documentation Stephanie provided. They wouldn't be, I said. Those are stored in the secure credential manager. Access is role-based. Right, so can you grant me access? I shook my head. I don't have administrative privileges for the credential manager. That would be Stephanie's level. But you access the production databases all the time. I have standing access because of my tenure and role. New assignments require director approval. Geoffrey's confident expression flickered slightly. Okay, but in the meantime, can you just handle the Carrington issue? It's becoming urgent. That account is assigned to you now. I'm focused on my current responsibilities. He studied me for a moment, recalibrating. You're really going to just let it break? I'm not letting anything break. I'm respecting the organizational structure Stephanie implemented. You're handling primary accounts. I'm handling documentation and maintenance. Everyone stays in their lane. Geoffrey pushed off from the cubicle wall and walked away without another word. At 4:47 p.m., 3 different systems were experiencing cascading failures. I could hear it in the increasingly frantic phone calls, the rapid footsteps, the way people kept glancing towards Stephanie's office. I submitted my timesheet and went home at 5 p.m. exactly. Tuesday was worse. The Carrington integration hadn't been fixed. Fletcher Industries was now threatening contract review. The automated reporting system that fed data to our executive dashboard had stopped running. It relied on a sequence of scripts I'd written that were triggered by specific database events, none of which were documented in any manual because they'd evolved organically over years of fixes and adjustments. Geoffrey spent the entire morning in meetings, trying to get up to speed. The problem was that getting up to speed required understanding 7 years of institutional knowledge, accumulated patches, undocumented workarounds, and system interdependencies that existed only in my head. By Wednesday afternoon, Stephanie's assistant called my desk. Ria, Stephanie needs you in the executive conference room. Immediately. The executive conference room was on the top floor, all glass walls and ergonomic chairs and a view of the city skyline. When I walked in, the entire leadership team was there, Stephanie, our VP of Operations Charles Brenner, CFO Ronald Hayes, and 4 other executives whose names I knew but whose functions had always seemed abstract to me. They all looked exhausted. Geoffrey was there too, sitting slightly apart from the main table, his expensive suit somehow looking rumpled. Ria, sit. Stephanie gestured to a chair. Her voice had lost its motivational polish. We need to understand what's happening with our systems. I sat. Charles leaned forward. We have 6 major clients experiencing service disruptions. Our internal reporting is offline. The data warehouse sync has failed for 3 consecutive nights. I'm hearing about problems in areas we've never had problems before. He paused, waiting for me to jump in with explanations or solutions. I waited. Ronald broke the silence. You built most of these systems. What's causing the failures? I couldn't say, I replied. I'm no longer responsible for those systems. Geoffrey is handling primary infrastructure now. Every eye in the room turned to Geoffrey. He shifted in his chair. I'm still familiarizing myself with the architecture. These systems are complex, and the documentation is incomplete. The documentation is complete, I said quietly. It's thorough, actually. I spent 3 years maintaining it. Every system has architecture diagrams, process flows, dependency maps, and troubleshooting guides. The issue isn't incomplete documentation. The issue is that documentation shows you what's supposed to happen. It doesn't teach you the 1,000 small decisions that keep complex systems running. Stephanie's expression hardened. Ria, you're being obstructive. I'm being precise. Geoffrey has the documentation. He has the access he needs, or he will want you approve his credentials. He has the role. What he doesn't have is experience with these specific systems. That takes time. We don't have time, Charles snapped. We have clients threatening to leave. I met his gaze. Then perhaps the reassignment was premature. The room went very quiet. Stephanie's face flushed. You're refusing to help? I'm doing exactly what was assigned to me. I've updated the legacy billing documentation. I've audited user permissions. I've reviewed 3 months of backup logs. I'm performing my role as defined. Your role is to support this team, Stephanie said. My role was redefined on Friday. You made it clear that Geoffrey handles primary systems and client accounts because he's more efficient. I'm respecting that decision. Ronald raised a hand, cutting off whatever Stephanie was about to say. He looked at me carefully. Let me ask directly, can you fix these issues? Yes. How long would it take? Carrington integration, 20 minutes. Fletcher API endpoint, 15 minutes. Data warehouse sync, an hour if the root cause is what I suspect. Executive dashboard reporting, 30 minutes to restart the job sequence and validate the outputs. The executives exchanged glances. Charles spoke slowly. So you're saying you could resolve our immediate crises in under 3 hours? Yes. But you're choosing not to. I shook my head. I'm choosing to respect the organizational structure that was implemented. If you want me to step back into my previous responsibilities, that's a decision for Stephanie to make. But understand what you're asking me to be accountable for systems I no longer officially manage, to be available for emergencies in areas that aren't my role, and to fill gaps that were created by a reassignment I didn't request. Stephanie started to speak, but Ronald held up his hand again. What would it take, he asked. For you to take back those responsibilities? This was the moment. The fulcrum point where everything could shift. I'd spent 3 days watching systems fail, listening to panic spread through the office, waiting for this exact question. I kept my voice level. That's not the right question. The right question is, why did reassigning my workload cause this much damage this quickly? No one answered. The answer is that Velvet Technologies has a single point of failure problem. One person, me, holds too much institutional knowledge and operational responsibility. That's a structural risk. Replacing me with Geoffrey doesn't fix the risk. It just exposes it. I looked around the table. The solution isn't to put everything back on my desk. The solution is to acknowledge what I actually do here, give me the authority and resources to build proper redundancy, and compensate me appropriately for the scope of work I've been performing without recognition. Charles studied me. You're saying you want a promotion. I'm saying I want my actual role to match my actual responsibilities. I've been functioning as a director of infrastructure for years. My title is Senior Systems Analyst. My compensation reflects the title, not the function. That needs to change. Stephanie looked like she'd bitten into something sour. This is extortion. This is a conversation about organizational risk, I countered. Right now, you're facing contract penalties, potential client loss, and operational disruption because one reassignment exposed how dependent you are on undocumented institutional knowledge. I'm offering to solve the immediate crisis and build a long-term solution. But I'm not doing it from a role that undervalues what I bring to this company. Ronald and Charles exchanged a look that contained an entire wordless conversation. Give us the room, Ronald said to everyone except Charles and Stephanie. Ria, you stay. Geoffrey and the other executives filed out. The door clicked shut. The negotiation lasted an hour. They tried several angles. Stephanie argued that I was abandoning team principles. Ronald pushed back on compensation numbers. Charles questioned whether I could actually deliver on the redundancy plan. I remained calm. I'd spent 3 days preparing for this conversation, and I had the stronger position. Every minute we sat in this room was another minute of system failures, another minute of client frustration, another minute of potential revenue loss. I laid out my terms clearly. 1. Immediate promotion to Director of Infrastructure and Integration. Reporting directly to Charles, not Stephanie. 2. Budget authority to hire 2 additional senior engineers within 6 months. 3. Compensation adjustment to match director-level market rates, retroactive to the beginning of the quarter. 4. Mandate for cross-training and knowledge transfer, with protected time allocated for documentation and mentoring. 5. Geoffrey remains on the team, but in a properly defined role as senior integration engineer, learning the systems under my guidance. That last point surprised them. You want to keep Geoffrey? Stephanie asked. I want to fix the structural problem. Geoffrey isn't the problem, he was put in an impossible position. The problem is that this company has been running on heroics instead of systems. We need to build depth. Charles tapped his pen against the table. And you think Geoffrey can learn this? I think anyone willing to learn can become valuable. The question is whether he's willing to do the actual work instead of just managing from a distance. Ronald looked at Stephanie. Your call on Geoffrey. Can he handle being a learner instead of a leader? Stephanie's jaw was tight. I'll discuss it with him. And the rest? Ronald asked. I held his gaze. Non-negotiable. All 5 conditions, or I walk out of this room and continue doing exactly what's on my current task list while your systems continue to fail. Silence stretched out. Charles broke it. You'd actually let it burn? I'd let you experience the natural consequences of your organizational decisions. That's not letting it burn. That's removing the safety net you've been taking for granted. More silence. Then Ronald nodded slowly. Draft the promotion paperwork. Make the offer. Thursday morning, I arrived at the office to find Geoffrey waiting at my desk. He looked like he'd slept poorly. Stephanie told me about the new structure. I nodded, logging into my computer. How do you feel about it? He laughed without humor. Honestly? Humiliated. I got brought in to be the efficiency expert, and 3 days later I'm back in a learning role. That's one way to see it. What's another way? I pulled up the system architecture diagram for the Carrington account. You got brought into an impossible situation without proper context or support, and when it predictably failed, you're getting a chance to actually learn instead of being fired. That's better than most people get. Geoffrey studied the diagram. You really think I can learn this? I know you can. The question is whether you want to. This isn't consulting work where you parachute in, optimize a process, and leave. This is infrastructure work. It's detail-oriented. It's about understanding dependencies and failure modes and all the boring, unglamorous stuff that keeps companies running. He pulled up a chair. Where do we start? We start with the Carrington integration. I'm going to fix it, and you're going to watch and ask questions. Then you're going to document what you learned. Then, next time something similar breaks, you're going to fix it while I watch. Over the next 2 hours, I walked Geoffrey through the entire Carrington system. Every integration point, every data transformation, every error handler. He took notes. He asked questions, good questions, technical questions that showed he was actually trying to understand rather than just get through the session. At one point, he caught something I hadn't explicitly explained. Wait, he said, pointing at the screen. This error logging routine, it's writing to 2 different databases. Why? I stopped. Looked at the code he was indicating. He was right. The logging was redundant, a vestige of an old system migration I'd never cleaned up. Good catch, I said. That's inefficient. Let's refactor it. Geoffrey's expression shifted. A small thing, but visible. The look of someone realizing they might actually be useful. We worked until early afternoon, fixing systems, documenting processes, building the foundation of what would eventually become proper institutional knowledge instead of just institutional dependency. Friday afternoon, I met with Charles and Ronald in Ronald's office, smaller than the executive conference room, less glass, more books. Charles slid a folder across the desk. Official offer. Director of Infrastructure and Integration. Reports to me. Compensation package is on page 3. I read through it carefully. Everything we'd discussed was there. The title, the salary adjustment, the hiring budget, the mandate for cross-training. There's one addition, Ronald said. We want quarterly reviews on system risk and redundancy progress. You'll present to the executive team on what's been done to eliminate single points of failure. Agreed. And Stephanie? I asked. Charles's expression remained neutral. Stephanie will be transitioning to a strategic planning role. She'll no longer have direct operational oversight. I didn't ask for more detail. I didn't need to. The message was clear. The person who'd created this crisis was being moved away from positions where she could create more. I signed the paperwork. The first week in my new role felt less like a victory lap and more like standing in front of a fire hose. Problems that had been deferred for years suddenly became my official responsibility. Every system gap, every undocumented process, every piece of technical debt, it all landed on my desk with the weight of formal authority behind it. But something had changed. People came to me with plans now, not just panics. The engineers Geoffrey and I were training started arriving at morning meetings with completed task lists and thoughtful questions about edge cases. The documentation wiki that had languished for years suddenly had daily updates as team members contributed their specialized knowledge. Geoffrey turned out to be a surprisingly good learner. Once he got past the ego hit, once he accepted that infrastructure work required patience and precision rather than flashy deliverables, he became genuinely useful. He had skills I lacked: presentation abilities, stakeholder management, a talent for translating technical concepts into executive-friendly language. 2 months in, we hired Alexandra Torres, a senior engineer with 15 years of database architecture experience. 3 weeks after that, we brought on Ethan Caldwell, who specialized in API design and integration patterns. Both of them were expensive hires, but Ronald approved the budget without hesitation. Apparently, almost losing major clients had clarified some priorities. The 4 of us, Geoffrey, Alexandra, Ethan, and I, started meeting every Monday morning to review system health, discuss technical debt priorities, and plan cross-training sessions. We created a rotation schedule where each person would shadow another for a full day each month, learning their primary systems and documenting their processes. It was slow work. Exhausting work. But it was also the right work. By month 3, we had successfully transferred ownership of the Fletcher Industries integration to Ethan. By month 4, Alexandra had independently resolved a critical database performance issue that would have previously required my direct involvement. Geoffrey took over the Carrington account completely and actually improved the original architecture I'd built, adding better error handling and monitoring. The systems were becoming institutional property instead of personal fiefdoms. One evening in early autumn, I left the office at 7 p.m., late, but not the midnight departures I'd been accustomed to. Geoffrey was still at his desk, working through some documentation updates. "Go home," I called over. "It'll be there tomorrow." He looked up, grinned. "Listen to you, suddenly work-life balance advocate." "I'm serious. This job will eat your entire life if you let it. Pace yourself." "Yes, Director Daniels." I walked to my car in the parking garage. The concrete structure was quiet, just the hum of ventilation systems and the distant sound of traffic. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine, letting the silence settle. 3 months ago, I'd been invisible. A load-bearing wall everyone leaned on but no one actually saw. Now I was visible. My title reflected my responsibilities. My compensation matched my value. My work was building systems instead of just being the system. But the real victory wasn't the promotion or the raise or even the recognition. The real victory was this: I could leave. Not leave the company, I didn't want to anymore, but leave the office at a reasonable hour because other people could handle the emergencies. Leave my desk during lunch because the documentation existed for someone else to reference. Leave behind the exhausting performance of being irreplaceable. I'd spent years being the safety net, and it had nearly destroyed me. Now I was building the foundation instead. Slower work, less dramatic, but far more sustainable. I started the car and drove home, leaving the office behind in a way I'd never been able to before. That night, I slept better than I had in years. 6 months into my directorship, Stephanie left Velvet Technologies. No drama, no confrontation. Just a brief company-wide email announcing her departure to pursue new opportunities. I heard through informal channels that she'd taken a position at a smaller firm, still in operations, still comfortable in rooms where decisions got made. I didn't feel vindictive satisfaction at her departure. Mostly, I felt tired relief. She'd been a symptom of the larger problem, the tendency of organizations to reward surface-level management over deep operational knowledge, to value competence over competence, to promote people who knew how to look good in meetings more than people who knew how to keep things running. That tendency still existed, would always exist. But at least in my corner of Velvet Technologies, we'd built something different. My team had grown to 6 people. We'd implemented a formal knowledge management system. We'd documented every critical process and created video tutorials for complex procedures. We'd established on-call rotations where no single person bore the entire burden of emergency response. The systems were humming. And humming systems are boring systems, which is exactly what infrastructure should be. One afternoon in late autumn, I was reviewing quarterly metrics with Charles when he asked, "Do you ever regret how it happened? The confrontation, the leverage, all of it?" I considered the question carefully. I regret that it was necessary. I wish I'd been valued appropriately from the start. I wish I'd set boundaries earlier, before I burned out enough to make dramatic gestures. But you don't regret the outcome. No. I don't regret the outcome. Charles nodded. For what it's worth, we should have seen your value earlier. That's on us. It's on all of us, I said. I stayed invisible for too long. I accepted being undervalued because it was easier than fighting. That's partially on me too. Fair enough. We returned to the metrics, but his question lingered in my mind for the rest of the day. Did I regret how it happened? The truth was complicated. I'd had to watch systems fail. I'd had to stand by while people panicked, knowing I could fix things but choosing not to. I'd had to weaponize my own competence, turning my value into leverage instead of just quietly providing it. That didn't feel good. It felt necessary, which is different. But the alternative was continuing to be the invisible backbone, continuing to be exploited, continuing to give more than I received until I had nothing left to give. So no, I didn't regret it. I regretted that it was necessary. But I didn't regret doing what was necessary. A year after the reassignment crisis, I was sitting in a conference room with my full team, 6 engineers now, each with clear specializations and documented backup coverage. We were conducting our quarterly system review, going through each major component and assessing risk, performance, and knowledge distribution. Alexandra was presenting on database optimization work. Ethan was walking through API performance metrics. Geoffrey was discussing client integration health. The newer team members, Marina Foster and Dylan Cross, were contributing observations from their respective areas. I watched them work through the review with minimal input from me. They knew their systems. They knew the processes. They knew how to identify problems and propose solutions. This was the real victory. Not the title. Not the compensation. Not even the recognition. The victory was that I'd transformed myself from a single point of failure into a foundation that supported multiple points of strength. I'd taken the institutional knowledge that had been trapped in my head and distributed it across a team. I'd built something that could outlast me, that could function without me. I was finally replaceable. And being replaceable, I'd learned, was the most valuable thing I could be. Because when you're irreplaceable, you're also immovable. You can't grow, can't take risks, can't step away. You're trapped by your own value, locked into being the person who holds everything together. But when you're replaceable, when you've built systems and trained people and documented knowledge, you're free. Free to think strategically instead of operationally. Free to work on larger problems instead of constant firefighting. Free to leave the office at reasonable hours because the safety net you built isn't you anymore. The meeting concluded. The team filed out, chatting about weekend plans and upcoming projects. Normal office conversation. Boring, beautiful, sustainable normal. I packed up my laptop and headed for the parking garage. The evening air was cool. Autumn was transitioning into winter. I could see my breath in the streetlight glow. I got in my car, started the engine, and sat there for a moment, not because I was exhausted, but because I wanted to mark the moment. To notice it. To recognize what had changed. A year ago, I'd been drowning. Drowning in work, drowning in being undervalued, drowning in the exhaustion of being essential but invisible. Now I was breathing. I drove home at a reasonable hour, ordered takeout, and spent the evening reading a novel that had nothing to do with work. And when Monday morning came, I woke up without dread. That, in the end, was the real comeback. Not crushing the people who'd undervalued me. Not forcing recognition through crisis. Not even the promotion and the raise, though those mattered. The real comeback was reclaiming my own time, my own energy, my own sense of self-worth. I'd stopped being the safety net everyone took for granted. I'd become the foundation they built upon instead. And that foundation was strong enough to hold not just the systems, but also a life worth living outside of work. I was Ria Daniels, Director of Infrastructure and Integration at Velvet Technologies. And I was finally, completely, free.